Rain slapped Isabella Reyes across the face as two security guards dragged her down the granite steps of the Whitaker estate and flung her suitcase into the puddles below. Thunder cracked over the Hudson, rattling the iron gates just as the front door slammed shut behind her with a sound that felt like a gunshot. "Please, Jonathan, I'm pregnant," she cried, her palm pressed to her still flat stomach. Inside the doorway, beneath the chandelier she had chosen piece by piece, Jonathan Whitaker didn't flinch. Tall, immaculate in a tailored charcoal suit, phone still in hand, he gave her the same detached look he used in boardrooms when dismissing underperforming executives. "That's convenient timing,
No.
Isabella," he said coolly.
No, they're coming.
"Don't try to manipulate me."
I will.
Lightning illuminated his sharp features. The man she had married 7 years ago, the ambitious dreamer she'd helped through sleepless nights and failed investor meetings, was gone. In his place stood a billionaire CEO protecting his image. Behind him, Lily Zhao appeared at the staircase landing, one hand resting on a subtle curve beneath her silk blouse. 3 months pregnant, Jonathan had announced minutes earlier. Isabella's breath had left her body like steam in winter air. "You're not welcome here anymore," Jonathan continued. "My lawyers handled everything months ago. You signed the documents yourself." The memory struck her like ice water. Stacks of papers. Routine restructuring. His soft kisses against her temple while she signed without reading. The guards avoided her eyes as they released her into the storm. The door closed, and with it, 7 years vanished. She stood in the rain long after the house lights dimmed, the diamond engagement ring catching flashes of lightning like a mocking signal flare. Inside that mansion were her dreams of nursery paint samples and Sunday breakfasts. Outside was a soaked suitcase and $312 in her checking account. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it ring. By morning, Isabella sat on the edge of a stained motel mattress near LaGuardia, the neon vacancy sign flickering outside her window. Nausea twisted her stomach, pregnancy and heartbreak competing for dominance. She checked her banking app again. Account frozen. Joint credit cards disabled. 7 years erased with a keystroke. A knock sounded at the door. Sharp, deliberate. She opened it to find a silver-haired man in a navy suit that radiated quiet power. "Ms. Isabella Reyes?" he asked. "Yes. I'm Thomas Caldwell of Caldwell and Pierce Estates. I've been attempting to reach you regarding your father, Alejandro Reyes." The name felt foreign. Her father had been a ghost, an absence her mother never spoke of. Isabella's childhood had been night shifts, microwave dinners, and her mother's tired smile. Alejandro Reyes had been a wound, not a memory. "He passed away in Barcelona 3 days ago," Thomas said gently. "And he left you his entire estate." She almost laughed. "You've made a mistake." "I assure you I haven't. The estate is currently valued at approximately $52 billion. The motel room seemed to shrink. "What?" "He also left instructions. He wanted you to know he never stopped watching over you." Thomas opened his briefcase, spreading photographs across the cheap floral bedspread. Elementary school graduation. Alejandro, standing in the back. College acceptance day. Her wedding. Him seated alone in the last pew, tears visible even in grainy resolution. "He was diagnosed with a degenerative neurological disorder shortly after your birth," Thomas explained. "He believed leaving would spare you watching him deteriorate." Isabella's throat tightened. "He funded your scholarship anonymously. And 7 years ago, when you invested your late mother's insurance money into Jonathan's startup, your father quietly matched it through layered investment entities." Her mind raced. Matched it, and then continued purchasing shares through shell corporations. Carefully, strategically, staying below disclosure thresholds. "How much?" she whispered. Thomas met her eyes. 48% of Whitaker Innovations. The air left her lungs. Jonathan owned 51%. She owned 48. Combined with restless minority shareholders, it was power. He anticipated Jonathan's character. Thomas continued. He conducted background investigations. Your father believed this day would come. Isabella sat down slowly. So, while I was being thrown out into the rain, he was ensuring you would never be powerless. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, but something colder formed beneath them. Clarity. Thomas handed her a sealed letter. If you are reading this, Mihija, Jonathan has shown you who he truly is. Do not beg for respect from a man who confuses kindness for weakness. I built this empire so that no one could ever discard you. Her hand stopped shaking. There's more, Thomas added. Jonathan is hosting a charity gala tomorrow night at the Imperial Meridian Hotel. Public debut of his relationship with Ms. Zhao. Of course he was. Your fathers will request that you attend, Thomas said carefully, from a position of strength. Isabella looked up, eyes transforming from shattered to calculating. Then I'll need a dress. The following evening, the Imperial Meridian shimmered against the Manhattan skyline, its crystal facade reflecting city lights like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Chauffeured cars lined the entrance. Photographers snapped images of Manhattan's elite. Inside, a string quartet played beneath golden chandeliers. Jonathan Whitaker stood at the center of it all, arm around Lily Zhao, smiling for cameras. His sister, Victoria Whitaker, floated nearby in crimson silk, surveying the crowd like royalty. The doors opened. Conversations dipped. Isabella stepped inside, wearing a midnight sapphire gown Thomas's firm had secured on short notice. It wasn't couture, it was borrowed, but she wore it like armor. Jonathan's smile faltered. Lily's grip tightened on his arm. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Isabella moved toward the champagne fountain, accepting sparkling water instead. Her heart pounded, but not from fear. From timing. Victoria approached first. You're unbelievable, she hissed. Didn't you get the memo? You're done. It's a public charity event, Isabella replied calmly. I donated. Victoria laughed sharply. Gold diggers always find a way. Guests shifted closer, sensing blood. Jonathan finally approached, smile stretched thin. Isabella, don't embarrass yourself. Embarrass myself? She repeated softly. Lily placed a protective hand over her stomach. You should move on with dignity. The hypocrisy burned, but Isabella remained still. Victoria lifted her champagne glass. Let's make this clear, she announced loudly. My brother is finally free of a woman who contributed nothing. The liquid flew before Isabella could move. Cold champagne drenched her gown. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. The empty glass followed, shattering near her feet. Gold digger. Victoria spat. Silence. Jonathan chuckled under his breath. And something inside Isabella locked into place. She slowly wiped her cheek. Then she smiled. I need to make a phone call, she said evenly. Victoria laughed. To who? Your bankruptcy lawyer? No, Isabella replied, pulling out her phone. To the board of directors. Jonathan's expression flickered. What are you talking about? He demanded. Isabella's voice carried across the ballroom. I inherited 48% of Whitaker Innovations this morning. The silence deepened. My father accumulated shares over 7 years. Through Santiago Holdings International. Perhaps you've heard of it. Jonathan went pale. If you're enjoying this story so far, Isabella said softly, eyes never leaving Jonathan's, imagine what happens next. She pressed dial, and the real storm began. Jonathan's laugh came out brittle. You're bluffing. Isabella didn't answer him. She lifted the phone to her ear as if the entire ballroom had ceased to exist. Mr. Langford, she said clearly. This is Isabella Reyes. I'm calling regarding the emergency provisions under Article 7 of the shareholder agreement. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Arthur Langford, the longest-serving independent director of Whitaker Innovations, was not a man one invoked lightly. He had clashed with Jonathan publicly over aggressive acquisitions and questionable expense reports. Jonathan lunged forward. Give me that phone. Before he could reach her, Thomas Caldwell stepped between them, calm as stone. I would advise you not to touch her, Mr. Whitaker. You're still being recorded. Phones were raised everywhere now. The quartet had stopped playing. The only sound was the faint hum of the ballroom's air system and Isabella's steady voice. Yes, Mr. Langford, she continued. As of this morning, Santiago Holdings transferred full voting authority to me. That brings my stake to 48%. I believe you, and several minority shareholders collectively hold an additional 9. Across the room, a few executives exchanged glances. Jonathan's face drained of color. "You can't prove that," he snapped. "Those entities are private." Thomas calmly lifted a tablet, screen glowing with legal documentation. Certified filings. Registered and notarized. Victoria's earlier bravado evaporated. "Jonathan," Isabella's tone never wavered. "I am formally requesting an emergency board meeting at 8 a.m. tomorrow to vote on immediate suspension of the CEO, pending investigation into fiduciary misconduct and misappropriation of corporate funds." Gasps. Lily's hand slipped from Jonathan's arm. On the other end of the line, Mr. Langford's voice rose loud enough that those closest could hear. "I've been waiting years for someone with sufficient voting power to say those words." The crowd shifted again, this time not in anticipation of drama, but in recognition of power realigning in real time. Jonathan's composure cracked. "This is absurd. You're emotional. You're pregnant. You don't understand what you're doing." Isabella slowly lowered the phone and looked directly at him. "I understand exactly what I'm doing." Her phone buzzed. Another director calling in. She answered on speaker. "Margaret Ellison here," came a crisp voice. "Is it true you control Santiago Holdings?" "Yes." A pause. "Then you should know we've compiled 12 months of evidence regarding personal expenditures charged to corporate accounts. The Hamptons property renovations. Lily's marketing retreat in Tuscany. Victoria's consultancy fees." All eyes turned to Victoria. Her face flushed scarlet. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Those were approved expenses." "Approved by you," Margaret replied coolly. "Which is precisely the problem." A tremor of laughter, not amused but stunned, rippled through the guests. Isabella stepped forward, champagne dripping from her hem onto marble floors worth more than her childhood apartment building. "You threw me out into a storm," she said quietly to Jonathan, though the silence carried her voice across the ballroom. "You told me I had no value, that I contributed nothing." She lifted her chin. "My mother's life insurance funded your prototype. My father's silent capital stabilized your Series A. And I spent 7 years defending your name in rooms where you weren't invited." Jonathan opened his mouth, but no words came. The phone buzzed again. Another director. Another confirmation. Votes were shifting. 7 in favor of immediate suspension, Thomas murmured after glancing at incoming messages. 2 undecided. 1 opposed. Jonathan staggered back a step. "You're destroying the company," he whispered. "No," Isabella corrected. "I'm saving it." The ballroom doors opened abruptly as 2 financial journalists, alerted by social media posts, slipped inside with cameras raised. This was no longer private humiliation. It was corporate history unfolding live. Lily finally found her voice. "You're doing this because you're jealous," she accused, though her voice shook. "Because he chose me." Isabella looked at her, not cruelly, but with clarity. "He didn't choose you," she said. "He chose himself. He always does." The words hit harder than any thrown glass. Victoria stood abruptly. "Jonathan, fix this." But Jonathan was staring at the tablet Thomas held, the legal confirmations, the timestamps, the share transfers executed hours before the gala began. "You planned this," he breathed. "Yes," Isabella said simply. "For 3 days. 3 days ago, she had been standing in rain with nowhere to go. 3 days ago, she had believed she was powerless. Now Manhattan's elite were watching the axis tilt beneath her husband's feet. She turned back to the phone. "Mr. Langford, with your support and that of the other directors, we meet the threshold required under Section 12 to remove the CEO by majority vote pending investigation." A pause. Then, "You have my vote." Applause did not erupt. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter, heavier, like the first crack in a glacier before it collapses. Jonathan's breathing grew uneven. "You'll regret this. Litigation will tie up those shares for years." Isabella smiled faintly. "The prenuptial agreement you insisted I sign excludes you from any claim to my inheritance." Silence. "And without your salary and stock liquidity," she added, "your leverage disappears." Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. Lily stepped back from Jonathan as if distance might preserve her own future. Phones continued recording. Trending hashtags were already forming. Hashtag Whitaker fall. Hashtag Gala takeover. Jonathan's shoulders sagged. For the first time in their marriage, Isabella saw fear in his eyes. Not anger, not arrogance. Fear. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. We can fix this privately. She almost laughed. Privately? Like the divorce papers you hid in tax documents? Like freezing my accounts while I slept? He swallowed. You humiliated me tonight, he tried again. Isabella's voice softened, but only slightly. You humiliated yourself. Her phone chimed with a final message from Thomas's screen. 8 votes confirmed, Thomas announced quietly. Effective immediately, Jonathan Whitaker is suspended as CEO, pending formal ratification at tomorrow's meeting. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Jonathan looked around the ballroom, at investors avoiding his gaze, at executives whispering, at Lily stepping subtly farther away. He had been untouchable an hour ago. Now he was radioactive. Security, hotel security this time, approached cautiously, uncertain which side they served. Isabella met their eyes calmly. Mr. Whitaker is no longer representing the company in any official capacity tonight. The subtle shift in posture was immediate. Respect moved, not loudly, but decisively. Jonathan's voice broke. You're vindictive. Isabella considered that. I'm accountable, she replied. There's a difference. Victoria tried once more. You think you've won? Running a company isn't revenge fantasy. Isabella faced her fully. No, it's responsibility. Something your family never understood. A low murmur of agreement drifted from a cluster of mid-level employees who had long endured Jonathan's temper. Isabella turned to the crowd. My first action as interim chair will be a full forensic audit of executive expenditures over the past 3 fiscal years. Victoria's expression froze. My second action will be restructuring leadership to prioritize transparency and sustainable growth. She rested her hand over her stomach. My third action will be establishing a parental support initiative within the company so no employee is ever penalized for starting a family. The last sentence struck deeper than any accusation. Several women in the audience exchanged glances of quiet gratitude. Jonathan looked as though he had been physically struck. You're replacing me? He whispered. No, Isabella said softly. You replaced yourself. A reporter pushed forward. Ms. Reyes, are you confirming the CEO has been removed? Isabella met the camera lens without blinking. Effective tomorrow morning, the board will formalize the transition. The story was no longer about betrayal. It was about transformation. Jonathan's phone began buzzing, calls from investors, analysts, partners. He stared at it as if it were a bomb. Lily stepped away entirely now. Jonathan, she said quietly, you told me everything was secure. He didn't answer. Isabella felt something unexpected then. Not triumph. Relief. For the first time since the rainstorm outside the mansion, she wasn't fighting for survival. She was choosing her future, and the world was watching. Jonathan's phone slipped from his hand and hit the marble floor with a hollow crack. No one rushed to pick it up. The man who had once commanded rooms with a glance now stood isolated beneath a chandelier that suddenly seemed too bright, too exposing. Conversations resumed in low murmurs, not about charity, not about philanthropy, but about governance, liability, and collapse. Lily's voice trembled. Jonathan, tell me this isn't real. He looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time, not as an accessory, not as validation, but as a consequence. It's temporary, he muttered weakly. Lawyers will fix it. But even he didn't believe it. Isabella turned away from him, the soaked hem of her gown whispering across the marble as she walked toward the ballroom's center stage. Thomas remained a respectful step behind her. A microphone still stood near the podium, where Jonathan had planned to make his triumphant speech introducing Lily as the future of Whitaker Innovations. Isabella picked it up. The feedback squealed briefly, sharp and jarring. The room quieted again. She took a slow breath. Tonight was meant to celebrate generosity. She began, her voice steady, resonant. Instead, it revealed something far more important. All eyes were on her now. Power, she continued, does not belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to those who use it responsibly. A few nods. A few murmured agreements. 3 days ago, I stood outside my home in the rain after being told I had no value, that I was replaceable, that I contributed nothing. Her gaze swept the crowd, not accusing, but unwavering. I believed it for a moment. Jonathan flinched. But value is not defined by someone else's arrogance. It is defined by integrity, by resilience, and by the courage to stand up when you're pushed down. She rested her hand gently over her stomach. I am pregnant, she said, letting the truth settle fully in the room. And I will not raise a child in a world where cruelty is mistaken for strength. The silence that followed felt reverent. This company was built with shared sacrifice. My mother's insurance money. My father's silent investment. The loyalty of employees who believed in something bigger than one man's ego. Several Whitaker Innovations staff members lowered their heads, emotional. Tomorrow, that belief will be restored. A reporter's camera flashed. Effective immediately, I will serve as interim chair of the board. We will conduct a full audit. We will restructure leadership. And we will rebrand. A ripple of curiosity. The company will no longer carry the Whitaker name. Jonathan looked up sharply. It will be renamed Reyes Santiago Technologies, in honor of the parents who taught me sacrifice and foresight. Thomas's expression softened. Victoria let out a stunned whisper. You can't erase us. Isabella met her eyes calmly. You erased yourselves. The words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. Security approached Jonathan quietly this time. Not aggressively, but with clear direction. Mr. Whitaker, one of them said carefully, we'll need you to step aside from official representation tonight. It was the same phrasing his own guards had used days earlier when escorting Isabella into the storm. The irony hung heavy. Jonathan looked at Isabella one last time. Not with love, not even with hatred, with realization. He had underestimated her. He had mistaken kindness for weakness, and it had cost him everything. Lily hesitated only a second before stepping fully away from him. Call me, she whispered, though it sounded more like a goodbye than support. Victoria remained frozen in her chair, crimson dress stark against pale skin. Isabella stepped down from the stage. Applause began slowly, not thunderous, not celebratory, respectful, measured. It grew gradually, echoing against crystal and gold. Not for revenge, for reckoning. Outside, Manhattan glittered as if nothing had changed. But inside the Imperial Meridian, an empire had shifted hands. Thomas leaned closer as they walked toward the exit. The board has already begun drafting transition documents. Media outlets are requesting interviews. Isabella exhaled slowly. Let them, she said. Transparency starts now. The cool night air greeted her like a baptism. The city hummed, taxis honking, distant sirens wailing, life continuing. 3 days ago, she had stood in rain with nowhere to go. Tonight she stood beneath clear skies with a future entirely her own. Thomas opened the car door. Before stepping inside, Isabella looked back at the towering hotel. Lights still blazed in the ballroom windows above. Do you think he understands what happened? She asked quietly. Thomas considered it. Eventually, consequences have a way of clarifying things. She nodded. Inside the car, she allowed herself a single tear, not of grief but release. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Margaret Ellison. Stock trading will likely halt at opening bell. But long-term investors are already expressing confidence in new leadership. Another message from Arthur Langford. Welcome to the fight. Isabella smiled faintly. Her father's final letter rested in her evening bag. She pulled it out again, smoothing the creased paper. You were never meant to survive quietly. Mihija, you were meant to lead. The words no longer felt like a burden. They felt like inheritance. She placed the letter back carefully. What about the mansion? Thomas asked gently. Isabella looked out at the skyline. Sell it, she said. Use the proceeds to fund parental leave and employee childcare programs. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Symbolic. Intentional. The car merged into traffic. Behind them, news alerts began lighting up phones across the city. Billionaire CEO suspended at own gala. Shareholder takeover shocks tech industry. Pregnant wife reclaims company. Jonathan Whitaker would wake up tomorrow to frozen assets, investor lawsuits, and a boardroom he no longer controlled. But Isabella would wake up to possibility. The next morning, headlines dominated financial news. Trading was paused. Analysts speculated. Employees gathered anxiously at headquarters. Isabella arrived not in spectacle, but in a simple navy suit, hair pulled back, eyes focused. Whispers followed her through the lobby. Some skeptical, many hopeful. She entered the boardroom where Jonathan had once sat at the head of the table. Arthur Langford stood to greet her. "Ms. Reyes," he said formally. She paused. "Isabella is fine." He smiled faintly. The vote was swift. Unanimous confirmation of Jonathan's removal. Formal appointment of Isabella Reyes as interim chair and acting CEO, pending executive search. A chapter closed. Another began. In the weeks that followed, forensic audits uncovered misused funds, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and inflated contracts benefiting Victoria's consultancy. Legal proceedings began. Jonathan retreated from public view. Lily disappeared from headlines. But inside Reyes Santiago Technologies, something shifted. Parental leave policies expanded. Transparent reporting systems launched. Mid-level employees found their voices valued for the first time. Stock prices stabilized, then climbed. Investors responded not to scandal, but to stability. And in a sunlit corner office overlooking the Hudson, Isabella often rested her hand over her growing belly, feeling small kicks that reminded her why she had fought. Not for revenge, for restoration. One afternoon, months later, Thomas brought her a framed photograph. Alejandro Reyes at her college graduation, standing quietly in the back, watching. "You think he'd approve?" she asked softly. Thomas's voice held certainty. "He always knew who you were." Isabella placed the photo on her desk beside a smaller one of her mother in scrubs, smiling despite exhaustion. Two legacies. One lesson. Power without empathy collapses. Power with purpose transforms. The rainstorm that once marked her exile had become a distant memory. And when her child was born, a daughter with fierce dark eyes, Isabella held her close and whispered, "You will never beg for your worth." Outside the hospital window, Manhattan shimmered again. But this time, the city felt different. Not because it had changed, because she had. The woman who once stood drenched and discarded on marble steps had become the architect of a new foundation. Not through violence, not through cruelty, but through clarity, courage, and the simple decision to refuse invisibility. And somewhere, in whatever quiet place love endures beyond absence, a father's faith had been proven right.